This week in wrestling history, which is fast becoming a favorite for many of you, I've seen the comments in the clips on YouTube. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. Hope you're enjoying it as much as I am, taking a trip down memory lane. This week we begin 39 years ago this week on November 4th, 1981. In his weekly column for the Philadelphia Journal, Gorilla Monsoon announced that superstar Billy Graham had died of cancer in his hometown of Paradise Valley, Arizona, which surely came as news to Billy Graham, who was still very much alive, and in fact remains alive to this very day. Graham lost the WWF title to Bob Backlund in 1978. He had left the company later on that year to wrestle elsewhere. In 1980, he stopped. And in 1981, he wrestled, I think, all of 2 matches the entire year. So he sort of dropped off the face of the earth a little bit. And as the story goes, Monsoon had heard a rumor that he had passed away. And so he printed that in his column. And when Graham came back in 1982 to wrestling, looking completely different. He was doing a kung fu type gimmick. It was like Kung Fu Billy Graham. He was looking smaller. Still muscular, but smaller than most people remember him being. He ended up not drawing very well in Philadelphia, probably because people thought that he really was dead and that it was an imposter Billy Graham, because we had heard and read in the newspaper that Billy Graham had died, and now this guy comes back claiming to be him, but that don't look like Billy Graham, so this must be an imposter. And the best part is that Monsoon never printed a retraction. Is the very definition of fake news. 32 years ago this week, on November 4th, 1988, John Carpenter's They Live, starring Roddy Piper, was released in theaters here in this country. It opened at number 1. It grossed nearly $5 million in its first 3 days, which was pretty good for back then. Carpenter was a big wrestling fan. He was very excited to meet Piper for the first time at WrestleMania 3. Piper later on admitted that when he met Carpenter for the first time, he had no idea who he was. He was introduced to him. It was a very cordial meeting. Carpenter knew who he was, but he had no idea who John Carpenter was. And in the film, Piper plays a drifter who discovers a special pair of sunglasses that allows him to distinguish human beings from aliens who are very quickly taking over the planet, and they're blending in as humans, and they're sending subliminal messages through the media. There's a lot of political overtones to the movie. But the movie features one of the all-time great fight scenes in cinema, and one of the longest. A 5-minute plus fist fight in an alley between Piper and Keith David, who was awesome in this movie, and he was awesome in The Thing, another Carpenter classic from the 80s. If you've never seen it, watch it. 26 years ago this week, on November 6th, 1994, AAA held its first American pay-per-view show titled When Worlds Collide, which WCW helped co-promote. Mike Tenay had hosted a wrestling radio show at the time, and this was his commentary debut. Every other WCW announcer declined to do the show, which is why Tenay ended up getting the spot. He knew a lot about Lucha Libre, he knew the wrestlers, he knew the holds. This is the show, ultimately, that would earn him a spot later on Monday Nitro. And WCW also began to bring in a lot of luchadors, and they would have Tenay do guest spots on commentary because he actually knew what the hell he was talking about. I love Bobby Heenan to death. I was never really the biggest Bobby Heenan fan of his run in WCW. To me, Bobby Heenan was never the same after he left WWE in 1993. But the one thing I must criticize him for, it was painful sometimes to listen to Bobby Heenan on commentary calling a cruiserweight match in WCW because he just didn't know what he was talking about. That was not, he was not in his comfort zone during those matches. That's why they would bring in Tenay. Tenay would know the backstory between these two guys, and he would know the names of all the moves. That really is where his strength was. But the match that this show is most remembered for is the classic tag team match pitting Los Gringos Locos, the team of Eddie Guerrero and Love Machine Art Barr, against Octagon and El Hijo del Santo. It was a best of 3 falls mask versus hair match where both members of each team had to be eliminated during each fall. They went into the final fall. They were all knotted up, 1 fall apiece, with the Gringos losing and getting their heads shaved. And this would turn out to be Art Barr's final match. He died about 2 weeks later of what is believed to have been a heart attack, but his death is still classified as being due to unknown or unspecified causes. After that match, Paul Heyman wanted to bring him in. He wanted to bring in Art Barr and Eddie Guerrero to ECW. They had interest from all of the major promotions, but Eddie ended up going. Eddie went on to much bigger things, and he even started to use Art Barr's Frog Splash as a tribute to his late friend. And in case you haven't looked at the calendar, you might know that in the segment next week, I'm going to be talking about Eddie Guerrero, unfortunately in a very similar way to Art Barr. So that's coming up next week. The next day, on November 7th, 1994, it was an episode of Monday Night Raw. Vince McMahon did something that he rarely, if ever, really. I mean, I can't remember another time where I saw him do something like this on television, on one of his shows. He gave a seemingly heartfelt goodbye on TV to the Macho Man Randy Savage, somebody who he was negotiating with for a new contract and they couldn't come to terms. And instead of just kind of ignoring the fact that he wasn't there or even going on TV and burying the guy, he gave a very heartfelt speech. And this is what he said. He said, "Conspicuous by his absence is the Macho Man Randy Savage. I would like to announce that unfortunately, Randy Savage has been unable to sign a new contract with the World Wrestling Federation. Unable to rather come to terms with the World Wrestling Federation for a new contract. Randy, I know you're out there listening, and on behalf of all of us here in the World Wrestling Federation, all of your fans, and certainly from me, your number one fan, I would like to thank you for all of your positive contributions to the World Wrestling Federation. Thank you, Randy Savage, for all of the wonderful memories for so many years in the World Wrestling Federation. We wish you nothing but the best. Godspeed, and good luck." Boy, he sure did like saying World Wrestling Federation, didn't he? He got about 5 or 6 World Wrestling Federation mentions in there in about 45 seconds. Holy shit. But that, Randy Savage's final appearance was the week before. The Halloween episode of Monday Night Raw. He was on commentary as he was every week with Vince McMahon, and then he was gone. That will go down forever as his final WWE televised appearance. He had been working without a contract for some time, and what Vince McMahon thought was a verbal agreement with him, he thought he had what was a verbal agreement with Savage to stay. Well, apparently those discussions for a new contract broke down. And Savage wanted to wrestle. This is really what it boiled down to. And I think his brother, the genius, Lenny Poffo, I think has talked about this as well. Savage was not ready to give up his career. He was not ready to hang up the tights. He still felt that he had gas left in the tank and that he could still contribute in the ring. He wanted to wrestle. He is a wrestler. Vince McMahon, though, was trying to move beyond that and start focusing on what they started dubbing the new generation. 1994 was the start of the new generation. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker and Yokozuna and all these, Tatanka and all these different people. And Randy just was not part of those plans. And now you'll hear Jerry the King Lawler. And he did this actually on the Broken Skull sessions with Stone Cold on the network. Very good interview, but it drove me nuts listening to him talk about this. And it may just be that he's just misremembering. He's not lying or making it up. Maybe his memory is just faulty when it comes to this, but he tells this erroneous story about being backstage that night at Monday Night Raw and being shocked when they put Nitro on one of the TVs backstage. And what did they see? They saw the Macho Man Randy Savage on screen. Forgetting that WCW Monday Nitro did not even exist in 1994. Savage did not debut on WCW television. It was on Saturday night, actually. He didn't debut on WCW television for another month after McMahon even gave this speech. McMahon knew full well that he was negotiating a deal with WCW. He came to find out that he was negotiating a deal with WCW to the point that WCW was served with papers a few days before Savage showed up live on TV. Because if I remember, I think that WCW's Saturday night appearance when he debuted, I think that was a live episode. So what happened is WWE served legal papers a few days before that to WCW, claiming that if they put him on TV, it would constitute a breach of contract. The only thing is, there was no contract. And evidently, the lawyers felt that they huddled together with WCW management, who wanted to know, look, is it safe for us to put this guy on TV? And the lawyers got together with them and said, look, there is no breach of contract here. There is no jeopardy in putting Randy Savage on our television show, and that's exactly what happened. And there was no lawsuit. There was no fallout from that. It was just an intimidation move by WWE, but it had no teeth. They had no grounds. There was no contract. Now, I don't doubt that Vince McMahon felt betrayed by somebody who he considered a friend. And that he took the Slim Jim. This cannot be, I think, downplayed enough. Savage, when he left, he also took with him the Slim Jim sponsorship. Eric Bischoff has said that Slim Jim sponsorship that Savage brought with him when he walked in the door at WCW was worth $1 million a year in revenue to WCW. It also had to be very embarrassing for WWE because Savage was the feature star on the cover of the December 94 issue of WWF magazine. The very same month he debuted for WCW, he's on the cover of the WWF magazine. You talk about bad timing. I still have that issue, actually, in my bookshelf here somewhere with the rest of my old magazines. I started buying the WWF magazine. I had a subscription. And the very first issue I ever got was February of 1992. It was that issue where Ric Flair is in like this director's chair. He was on the cover of the magazine. I got Flair to sign that magazine, actually, many years ago. So I know I have the Savage issue. It's in there. So I still have all the magazines. I have it in here somewhere. But anyway, Savage himself in interviews has said that and he didn't do too many interviews, but you can, if you go on YouTube, you will find a couple of shoot-style interviews with Randy Savage from around like 1999, 2000, somewhere around there. He didn't do very many of them, though. But he did say that the reason he left was simply because Vince McMahon had a different view of what he should be doing, and Randy wanted to wrestle. All the rumors years later about why he was blacklisted from the company, it's just that. It's just rumors. And it could just be as simple as Vince McMahon feeling betrayed in a way that he never did with any of the other people who left him. 24 years ago this week, on the November 4th, 1996 episode of Monday Night Raw, on the very same show where some pineapple head-looking kid named Rocky Maivia, remember that haircut, made his very first appearance, his actual first on-screen appearance on TV. On that same night, one of the most controversial angles in WWE history took place when Stone Cold Steve Austin traveled to the home of Brian Pillman in Cincinnati, Ohio. Austin had put Pillman back on the shelf when he Pillmanized his ankle. That's where the whole Pillmanized term comes from. He Pillmanized his ankle, put the chair over the ankle and stomped on it and re-broke it. In real life, Pillman needed more surgery on his ankle. His ankle was all just completely jacked up from the Hummer accident that he was in a few months earlier, so he needed more surgery. That was their way of getting him off of TV. So they did a big angle, where Austin was the one to put him back on the shelf. And so Austin was on his way to Pillman's home. But Pillman was prepared. Pillman was prepared with his wife standing right behind him. Pillman was on the couch, and his leg was all wrapped up on the couch. And he brandished a 9mm. And he said, when Austin 316 meets Pillman 9mm, I'm going to blow his ass straight to hell. And when Austin arrived, he ran into some of Pillman's friends outside the house, who he promptly beat up. Some friends they turned out to be. He broke into the house. There was a window in the back door. He smashed in the window. He unlocked the door. They filmed this whole thing. And Austin comes into the house, and the last shot that we see is of Pillman, and he's on his feet, hobbling on one leg, holding up the weapon right in front of his face, about to fire, and the feed cuts. And when they cut back to the arena, so I believe this angle was shot live, and the matches were all pre-taped, because Raw was not live that week. So they cut back to the pre-taped matches in the building. And Vince McMahon and Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross are on commentary, and they're talking about this like it's such a tragedy. They have that different tone in their voice. They can't believe what just happened. They're trying to get more information. Oh my God, what just happened here? We don't know exactly what happened. Eventually, they cut back to the house. Everybody was still alive. Austin had left, but then he came back. I remember Kevin Kelly going, "Oh my God, he's back again." And chaos just ensued all over again. Curse words were flying, unedited, on the USA Network because, like I said, the segment aired live. Unlike all the other ones that night, USA Network was not happy. USA Network did know about the angle in advance. They did approve it. What they did not approve of, though, and what WWE apparently did not know about, or they claimed they didn't know about, was all of the foul language that was going to be making the air live. And this was something that Austin and Pillman, I guess, my understanding is they just kind of decided to do that on their own to heat things up a little bit with the language because they wanted to try to make this angle more realistic. And that was their way of doing it. And let me tell you, they succeeded. The problem is that this just so happened to be the first week in Raw's new time slot, which was an hour earlier. Nitro had creamed them for like 18 straight weeks at that point in the ratings. And so USA Network, they bumped Raw up by an hour. So now you're airing even earlier in the night. And then the very first week that your show is airing earlier in the night, you have this happen. So you can understand why they would be upset. WWE was in full apology mode that weekend on Livewire with Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon was on Livewire, which was their live call-in show on USA Network on Saturday mornings, which I would like to see them add that to the network soon. I hope they do. Always fun to go back and watch the episode where Bruce from Connecticut called in, which was Paul Heyman under an assumed name. But Vince McMahon was on Livewire that weekend and he apologized. And he took full responsibility for what happened in the segment, even though Pillman called in. I mean, you could tell they were in full apology mode because they had Brian Pillman call in. Pillman was trying to apologize for his behavior. And Vince McMahon said, no, it's my fault. Excuse me, he goes, it's my fault. I'm the one who's responsible for what people see on the television show, so it's not your fault. You know, I remember watching it live and thinking that it was the most exciting thing that I had seen on WWE television in a very long time. So with this fan, this segment worked. This segment got a lot of people talking. A lot of my friends. This is a small sample size here, but it got a lot of people talking. When I say that the Attitude Era, you've heard me say that the Attitude Era didn't start in 98 or even late 97. I've traced the beginnings and I've credited the beginning of the Attitude Era to 1996. That is where the Attitude Era began to take shape. The Attitude Era began, as far as I'm concerned, in the fall of 1996. That is when the Attitude Era started. And this is maybe the angle that you can cite that really kicked things off. But I've always said the end of the year in 96 when Brett came back and you had those top 4 or 5 guys, all of whom were feuding over the championship. You had Sid, you had Bret Hart, you had Shawn Michaels, and you can throw in Vader and, The Undertaker in there as well, Austin. So it was actually a group of like 5 or 6 guys. Everybody was always walking around pissed off. This was not for jokes, it wasn't for comedy, it wasn't for anything like that. Everybody wanted the championship. Everybody hated each other. Everybody had some kind of beef with the other guy. Babyfaces didn't like the other. Bret Hart didn't like Shawn. Shawn didn't like Bret. We know that. But Austin was walking around every week all pissed off. And, that to me is where I trace back the roots of the Attitude Era. And then what really set things off was a few months later, before WrestleMania 13, when Bret lost on Raw in that cage match, and he flipped out. He shoved Vince McMahon on his keister, and he started cursing on television. This is bullshit. If you people don't like it, tough shit. So you want to trace back the roots of the Attitude Era, you go back to then. 22 years ago this week, on November 2nd, 1998, Vince McMahon, from his motorized wheelchair, unveiled the Hardcore Championship for the very first time, and he awarded the title to Mankind as a way to curry favor with him and keep him away from The Rock, who Mick Foley was very friendly with on TV. He gifted him the title contingent on him not getting involved in the match that night between The Rock and Ken Shamrock. It would be the one and only time that Mankind would hold the Hardcore title. He lost it a few weeks later, maybe a month later, to the Big Boss Man. On that same Monday Night Raw episode, Vince McMahon also gave us this very memorable quote. Wondering, for those people who are wondering when or even if Vince McMahon may ever give up control of the company to his kids or anyone else, I think this is a very telling quote. Austin, Stone Cold Steve Austin, was in the ring, and Vince is on the stage in his wheelchair, and he says, "Austin, you'd like it if I retired, wouldn't you? You'd really like that. You'd like it if I retired. And Shane, you'd really like it if I stepped down so that you could take over, right?" And then he looks at the fans and he says, "And all of you would all like it if Vince McMahon sort of faded away, sort of disappeared. Some of you would even like it if I died." And people cheered. He goes, "Well, let me say this. That's the only way that I am ever going to step down as the chairman of this organization, is the day I die. And when I die, I don't want a damned one of you to come to my funeral. No family, no friends, no superstars. When I die, I want to go straight to hell." Vince McMahon, he was like peak Mr. McMahon during that period. 98 into 99. Although to be fair, he was still pretty good even into 2000. And but that Mr. McMahon character at his peak was just the best. But there's a lot of truth. Here we are over 20 years later, and there is a lot of truth in that quote. I think that's about the only way that you're going to see Vince McMahon not as the chairman of the board of this company. 16 years ago this week, on November 2nd, 2004, at the Smackdown taping in St. Louis, Missouri, Kurt Angle challenged all of the contestants in the $1 Million Tough Enough Challenge. This was season 4 of Tough Enough, which was done a little bit differently. It used to be its own standalone show on MTV for the first, 2 or 3 seasons. And here, what they did for this season was they just hosted a whole series of segments that would just air on Smackdown every week. And that was a counter to the Diva Search, which was being held on Monday Night Raw. So Raw had the Diva Search, and SmackDown had the $1 Million Tough Enough Challenge. Daniel Puder was one of the contestants that season on Tough Enough, and Puder had a background in mixed martial arts. He had fought at least once, maybe twice before then, so he had some MMA experience coming into this thing. He volunteered to wrestle Kurt Angle in an amateur competition, to get in the ring and just kind of spar with him a little bit. And so he gets into the ring, and this is the incident that still gets talked about to this very day. They started wrestling. Puder gets Kurt's arm locked in a key lock, which is like a Kimura lock. See, I don't know if there's a difference between a key lock and a Kimura lock. Maybe somebody who's more MMA oriented can comment and let me know what is the difference between a key lock and a Kimura lock, because to me, it just seems like the name might be interchangeable. They look like the same move. So we'll call it a key lock. he gets him in this thing. It looks like he's going to break Kurt's arm. He's got Kurt's arm behind him. He's wrenching back on the arm. And this could have been a complete and total disaster. I mean, this was on its way to being that. This was on its way to turning into a disaster. This would have made Kurt look very, very bad. Thanks to some quick thinking, though, from referee Jimmy Corderas, who could tell that this was on the verge of ending very badly for Kurt Angle. When Kurt fell forward on top of Puder, he still had his arm wrenched behind him, but he fell kind of on top of Puder. And that is when Corderas, he saw his opportunity, and he dropped down, and he made a quick 3 count. Even though Puder's shoulder came up at 2, he counted 3 anyway. Corderas knew that he had to put an end to this. He did not have anybody in his ear. He did not have Vince McMahon or anybody in his ear telling him to do that. He just instinctively started counting. Had he not done so, Kurt Angle would have had to tap out to this rookie, or he possibly would have gotten his arm broken. Although I would think if Puder wanted a contract with this company, he would have known better than to actually follow through and break the guy's arm. But I'll tell you what, if he did, I mean, this incident still gets talked about, but this guy would have been a hero forever. You challenge Kurt Angle, Kurt's like, all right, kid, get your ass in the ring, and you go in there and you break the arm of this Olympic gold medalist. I mean, he would have had a wrestling gimmick. His gimmick would have been solidified for the rest of his life. He could have made money on the independent scene just going around and saying, hey, I'm the guy who broke Kurt Angle's arm on Smackdown. He could have made a killing. So that could have ended very, very badly. And it's not that Kurt couldn't handle himself. Like he's not a tough guy. Of course, Kurt Angle is a tough guy, but he was physically very beat up. And no matter how tough you may be, there are certain holds and submissions that if you get trapped, there's no way out. You have a guy here in Puder who is younger. I don't know if he was stronger at that point, but yeah, I don't care how tough Kurt Angle is. Everybody can get caught. Every great fighter, right? You get punched in the face. All it takes is one good shot. Everybody can get caught on any given day. And that almost happened to Kurt Angle here in this segment. Now, Al Snow was the head trainer on Tough Enough. He became like a father figure on those early seasons of Tough Enough for a lot of these guys. And Al Snow has talked about this in shoot interviews, and he has said, he goes, this is why you do not do things like this in the wrestling business. This is why you try, if you can, to work everything, if at all possible, to not allow for outcomes that you cannot control. And according to Snow, who was in the ring and watched the whole thing right in front of his eyes go down, he was in the ring during this whole segment. He told the people in the back, he's never said who, if it was Vince or somebody else, but he told the people in the back, this is a bad idea. And they wanted to do it anyway. They insisted on doing it anyway, just like they did something very similar with Big Show. There was another Tough Enough segment on SmackDown that same season, and there was an incident with Big Show. And they wanted Big Show to body slam each one of the Tough Enough guys. And Al Snow said that he recommended against that. He said, why don't we do this? Let's have Big Show chop them across the chest instead. Because if he body slams them, they don't know how to sell it. You might have one or two guys, maybe they've wrestled independently and they can sell okay, but a lot of these guys are very inexperienced. They're not trained professional wrestlers. They are not going to know how to properly sell a body slam from a guy who, when he body slams you, you better sell the shit out of it, because this is the biggest guy, physically, the biggest guy that we have on our roster. This is a bad idea. And again, they insisted. Now, if you go back and you watch that segment, Big Show was visibly angry with a lot of those guys because a couple of them dead-weighted him. You could see they dead-weighted him on the lift. Why would you do that? Why would you deadlift the Big Show? Why would you try to piss off the Big Show? I mean, do you actually think that's going to get you in the good graces of the people backstage in that company? You're trying to get a contract for a job to work there. You really want to make your life a living hell, but it's just, they're just young and dumb and they're inexperienced, and they're like, oh, I'm better than all these guys. And they're too stupid to realize. They're too ignorant and too stupid to realize that what they're doing is they're shooting themselves in the foot. And Big Show was pissed. Ryback sold it. Ryback was on that season. The Miz was on that season. The Miz sold it. But if you go back and watch, Big Show was angry because these other idiots in the segment who were deadweighting him and who weren't selling the body slam. Now, he still slammed them because he's a 450-pound giant and he's going to slam you whether or not you want to go up for it or not. But with one guy, as soon as he slammed him, he immediately dropped a very stiff elbow onto his chest. That guy didn't get up so fast after that. There was another one after he slammed him. It might have been that Daniel Rodimer guy who I actually think he just ran for a congressional seat. I think he lost in the election. He just ran for some state office and I think he lost. But I think it was Rodimer. He picked up Rodimer and slammed him. He also tried to deadweight him, and as soon as Big Show slammed him, he dropped a knee right down onto his chest. That guy didn't get up so fast either. This is why you don't put your wrestlers in a position to be made to look bad. Steve-O found that out the hard way years later on Raw with Umaga. 13 years ago this week on November 6th, 2007, yours truly recorded the very first episode of the Solomonster Sounds Off podcast, which found a home at the time on SEScoops.com. This week is the big anniversary. It ran a whopping, that first episode ran a whopping 7.5 minutes, which is still the shortest episode that I have ever done. Here we are, 677 episodes later. And that doesn't even include all of the YouTube stuff. That doesn't include all of the reviews and the streams on YouTube. But this was a rare Tuesday episode of the Sound Off. I talked about Monday Night Raw from the night before, which saw the supposed one-night-only reunion of DX with Shawn Michaels and Triple H, which is comical when you consider how many DX reunions we've had since then. Before then and since then. And the return of Stone Cold Steve Austin to confront Santino Marella, who had been talking a lot of crap about him for weeks on TV. Austin was there to promote his new movie, The Condemned, which was coming out on DVD. And then he gave Santino a beer bath. Not quite the same as the beer bath he gave the corporation. But sequels are rarely as good as the original. And 2 years ago, on November 2nd, 2018, WWE held its Crown Jewel show from Riyadh. Sweet Saudi Money 2, Electric Boogaloo, featuring Kurt Angle's first singles match in a WWE ring in 12 years. A first-round loss to Dolph Ziggler in the World Cup tournament, which Shane McMahon went on to win. He went on to become the best in the world. Brock Lesnar beat Braun Strowman to become the new Universal Champion after Roman Reigns was forced to vacate the title due to his leukemia diagnosis. And Shawn Michaels returned to the ring for the first time in 8 years for a disastrous tag team match pitting DX against the Brothers of Destruction. A match where bald Shawn Michaels, which is still just, it looks wrong and it sounds wrong, but there he was. Bald Shawn Michaels looked the best out of all of these men in the ring. And he's the one that retired coming into the match. He's the one who hadn't had a match in 8 years. And he looked better than everybody else. Kane's mask and wig accidentally went flying off his head. He was on the top rope with Shawn Michaels and Shawn punched him. And yeah, the wig is attached to the mask and it goes flying and Kane is trying to cover up as if we don't know what the fucking guy looks like. He's trying to cover up. He had to scurry down outside the ring to quickly put the mask back on. Triple H, not 5 minutes into this match, tore his pec. And he was basically working the match with one arm. I respect the effort, but this was just sad to watch. 4 men that I grew up watching. These guys were such a big part of my... I mean, I wasn't really even as, they were in the middle of probably their prime run during the Attitude Era. I mean, I wasn't a young child anymore, but I consider that my childhood still. These 4 guys were such a big part of my wrestling childhood. And I watched them for so many years, and I saw them in their prime, and to watch them in the ring in this kind of match where everything just felt like it was falling apart, and how slow some of them were moving, which is understandable because they're a lot older and they're a lot more beat up, especially Undertaker. I mean, you can understand it. But here I'm watching these four guys no longer in the primes of their careers, just doing it, as Shawn Michaels said, because they thought it would be fun to do. And it looked like they were having anything but fun. It didn't look like it was very fun even for them. But I'm sure they got a very nice payday out of it. They were soaking their tears in their dollar bills. And that is why, they have a lot of big names on these shows. Why do you think they've gotten Brock Lesnar to constantly go back to Saudi Arabia, or The Undertaker to constantly go back to Saudi Arabia? Because they're making ridiculous money for a few minutes of work. So it's not hard to understand why they do it. Pay me that much money to fly halfway across the world to wrestle for 10 minutes. I'm going to have to think about that. I can't give you an answer right now, but more than likely, I'll be on that plane. And I hope that these guys, all four of them really, but Michaels, I just try to pretend this match didn't happen and that he had a nice send-off at WrestleMania 26. That is how I choose to remember the final match of Shawn Michaels.